Good morning, good evening, team who have joined from different geographies. Hope you all are keeping well during this pandemic times. My name is Anushil Gupta. I'm a part of Global Alliance team at LTI. I manage Salesforce and Mulesoft Alliance globally. Thank you very much for joining this journey of APIfication that we are going to talk about today. It is mainly on API-led cloud transformation and ERP modernization, wherein we would try to cover a few of the pointers wherein how do we digitize the core, accelerate cloud journey, and how do we create an ecosystem to respond to demand. With this, let me welcome the speaker who is going to take the discussion ahead today. So today we have Scott Ratcliffe, who is a technical architect from Mulesoft, and we have Manish Ranjan, who is our associate principal enterprise architecture. They are going to cover this amplification journey for you. Please do post your questions into the chat window. We will try to cover them during the discussion or maybe at the end of session as much as possible. If there are few questions which we could not attend today, probably we may subsequently respond to them and then take them ahead. So with this, I welcome Manish to take the discussion ahead. Manish, please take it up.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Anushil. Okay, good morning and good evening, everybody. So, should we start? I think we are 2 minutes ahead. Okay, so let me start. So I assume you all know what is API, how APIs are used. So we are not going to cover all that, what is API and what all benefits you are getting. So we, in this webinar, going to talk about a completely new way of using API, or so it's a little different from what we have seen in other implementation of it. So API is perceived as, let's say, products that are launched in public domain or for monetization purpose or for integration with external third-party subscribers. There are many tools which are focusing on API lifecycle of its management using API alone and using ASP as a supporting components only. But however, based on our experience, we observed that we cannot have our API story without a robust API-led ESP as backbone. And they are so much interdependent on each other that APIfication story is incomplete without touching upon all aspects of integration at enterprise level. So, if you look at other, I'll not name that tool, but Mulesoft has, if you really compare with other tools in the market, either they are very strong in API management or they're very strong in ESB features. But, we need a good blend of both. And Mulesoft has the correct blend of both, best of both worlds, a very strong API capability with an API-oriented ESB. So in this webinar, with one example, we are going to cover our journey of digitalization using API-led ESB at its core. And we'll talk about API uses as an enabler of process automation. Okay. So let's start with one quotation, and this quotation is from Forrester Research, the latest from Forrester. Then API is open new angle into business strategy and thus deserve the attention of senior management, even the C-suite. We'll cover these little in more detail in our subsequent slides. So let me give you a brief about the case study that we are referring to tell our story in this webinar. So this example is taken from one of our implementation done for one equipment manufacturing company. This company is based out in USA with operations all across the world, with local installation in various regions. The organization was using traditional ESB-based integration. It was all working fine, and role of EI was limited to keep the lights on. But when it started modernizing its operation to achieve smart manufacturing and fully integrated supply chain, it realized that there are many bottlenecks which are preventing smooth flow of data required to incorporate data in motion decision making. Some of very important are, like, there are more than 10 ERP systems, that 300 plus integrations, there are so many batch operations, and these batch operations are running end of the day, and some batch operations are running end of the week. There are a lot of file-to-file integrations where even it was not required. So even if ground staffs and systems were using all advanced technologies, scanning devices, but the data was not all linked together. And thereby, the organization was not able to utilize that data, which is in the flow. Okay, I would like to hand over to my friend Scott, who will talk more about expectations and overall objective of the program. Thank you.
Before we go to Scott, I do have a poll which will make more interesting this session. So I'm just going to run a poll, and then probably we can take it up with the audience. So here we go. This is the first poll, and we expect people response, and then accordingly we can take them up. Over to you, Scott. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so thanks. So with this particular customer that we're talking about, the one thing to kind of note is they were part of a parent company and they're being split off. So one of the challenges that that Manish was talking about as well was that they had a timeline and they had to get off of the parent company systems within that time. And so instead of just doing a lift and shift where they just take the existing integrations from the other company and just move them over to a new platform, they really wanted to drive that digital modernization. So one of the expectations was to have a real-time interfaces to drive their supply chain. They wanted to build these interfaces in such a way that they could pivot as the business needs changed. In addition to that, they wanted to maintain that the ability to have that consistent view of data. So instead of having 14 different systems, dealing with a particular data model, and then each system having its own system-specific data model, they wanted to have a more consistent model across all of those systems, so that they could swap systems in and out as the needs changed. And this all led to the business objectives that we're going to talk about. So the first one is the service consolidation, and what they wanted to do. So originally there were 300 and more than 300 different integrations that had to be completed within this time period, this 18-month time period. And so instead of doing 300 point-to-point integrations, they wanted to actually change the landscape so that they could build a service catalog. And that would lead towards more reusability as each new interface came in. They would know which services to interact with, and if the services were already built, then they would reuse those services. And if they weren't, then they'd have to add that to the service catalog. So they had to go across the whole landscape of all those 300 interactions and kind of decide how to break it out and what pieces to put in there. So as you can imagine, with these technical challenges and these expectations and objectives, some priorities had to be made or set. And so the first thing that they wanted to do was they wanted to go to cloud. It was imperative for them to get off of their on-prem systems and move to SaaS-based integrations, as well as having these integrations in the cloud. And so they chose Mulesoft's Cloud Hub technology to do that. They also wanted to design for the future. So they, as Manish talked about, they had a number of flat file batch jobs that were running, and instead of just propagating that kind of mindset going forward, they wanted to make sure that what they built had some API capabilities in there as well, so that today that they'd be putting in for the flat file stuff, but then they could easily pivot to more real-time integrations as time went on. So from a strategic point of view, they were able to tackle some of those APIs, and then the other parts they were able to say, okay, I'm just going to migrate this now and then, but make it available for real-time use in the future. So they wanted to simplify, instead of having these 300 point-to-point integrations, they wanted to simplify their landscape and build this composable environment where pieces could be swapped in and out, and reuse was high. And lastly, they wanted to have a framework of services that they could put together, so that going forward, that any new integrations or any new business challenges, anything new that came in would be easily handled. So as we talked about, like the challenges, the expectations and objectives, let's take another quick poll real quick.
Thanks. Meanwhile, you're receiving the answer for the first poll. Here we go for the second one. Thank you.
Yep. All right. So, okay. So as we're taking the other poll, lack of support. Okay. Cool. All right. So as we move on now, we'll come back to the polls later on. Once we have all of our objectives and everything kind of figured out, we had to start strategy sessions. And with that, we came out with these 4 pillars of how to attack this transformation. The first one was architectural considerations, and with the architectural considerations, we had to deal with, as Manish had mentioned, some of the challenges. We had to deal with custom apps that didn't have any API-based integrations. We had to figure out this canonical model so we can give them that kind of centralized data approach. We also had to look at the batch jobs as well as the API jobs to basically make sure that what we're going to build was going to have a good API load. So we're going to build those APIs and the containers that were inside that they're inside to be strong enough to handle the load coming in, as well as managing the time it takes for these real-time integrations. And so with all those architectural considerations, we also wanted to focus towards these building blocks. And the building blocks were essentially building a set of plans and patterns using the tools that are on the screen here to simplify the development and the architecture of what we're building. So instead of spending months in design sessions, having these building blocks for the architecture building block side, we were able to pick a pattern, use that pattern, and then developers knew how to code it. The architecture team knew kind of what there was going to be built, as well as the testing teams. And then from there we were able to understand kind of what was going to happen. With that, we had to break out these 300 and I think it was like 375 different interactions and into phases. And so taking that multi-phased approach, we had to have a different methodology. So we chose DevOps in order to accelerate the deployments, and we had Agile as a methodology for coding and breaking down the sprints into backlogs. And lastly, we had the CI/CD process that helped automate deployments and even do some code standardization there. And then lastly, on this these 4 pillars was the governance. And on the governance side, now that we had all these APIs built, and we needed to make sure that they were secure and they were healthy and performant. So with those, we made sure we had testing in there. We had some high availability concerns that we were mitigated, as well as other things that we'll talk about a little bit later. And so with that, Manish is going to talk now about how that journey was taking place.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Okay, so the our observation is traditional development processes are not appropriate for API-based development because the requirement for API-based developments are quite a bit different to our traditional software lifecycle. Like we, the API developer, not just focusing on the requirement at hand, but also developing a reusable service that is designed to be used for all future requirements at organization level. So in order to build a robust ecosystem of API development and its effective uses, we came across 5 fundamental building blocks. And these 5 building blocks are depicted here in this presentation. Let me go through this, though we'll cover it in more detail in our subsequent presentation, but let me go through this at a high level. So guiding principle, architecture blueprint, API governance, service development, and last is enablement, which is an implementation phase. So guiding principle is basically defining the boundary and provides the direction to the overall modernization journey. Having a robust, predefined, clearly articulated, well-thought guiding principle will help take right decisions and thereby can help in change in culture at organization level. So if you really look at your survey, you answer that first is maximum is lack of strong API governance or lack of support for API in legacy applications. So these are some of the cultural elements that are preventing an implementation of API-led architecture in an organization. So this guiding principle will actually help you in that regard. architecture blueprint is basically a process of consolidating, identifying all existing and possible use cases and patterns. Analyze blueprint of the proposed architecture is documented. The design is evaluated against all possible scenarios, let's say positive, negative, high volume, high concurrency, all that stuff. And then this blueprint is used as a guide for developers to go and develop APIs. API governance is one of the most important setup, ensuring quality of development. API governance is a set of rules that ensures that standards and security principles are followed throughout the development lifecycle. Service development is basically a process of consolidating all similar objects together into one canonical format. We call this common business object. Define the service, develop YAML documentation, and expose that as an API. This will contribute in service catalog, which will be listed in the marketplace or developer portal for applications and app developers to subscribe. And at last, in enablement, this is an implementation phase. Developers are, all developers use published API to integrate various applications using whatever pattern required for their implementation. Okay. Let me go to the next little deep dive about what guiding principle. Though it sounds little philosophical, guiding principles are cultural statement of the organization aspiring to go to the next level. This will guide entire team irrespective of role to adapt to the philosophy of APIification. So in this, I'm not going to read out all that stuff. At high level, goal setting of what to achieve and how to proceed is all done in guiding principles, setting boundaries and setting priorities. Short-term and long-term milestones are defined. Some of these guidelines that are affecting decision-making are shown here, like real-time APIs, event-based API, and public-private API. When to create real-time API, a must go for the program. So you cannot compromise with those APIs. They must be real-time in nature, and all the processes upstream and downstream must be aligned or linked with this API. Okay, a real-time API. It is only for an integration, so only connecting two applications, data synchronization at real time, we can do that. And at last, where you have to say no, where you can see this is not required. Don't force feed to make it a real time API when you feel like this is not required. Let's say high volume data transfer or only data reconciliations. Okay. Public and private API. A separate guideline, because for public API the approach is quite different than what we do for an internal and private API. Even the security aspects and where to deploy and how to expose are also different. Okay, let me go to next level. This is the blueprint. This is a typical blueprint of most of the organizations. Maybe system and application would be a little different. You can see there are some applications which are on-prem guarded by firewall. There are some applications which are hosted on private cloud. For example, here we have depicted it in Azure Block. And there will be some third-party applications like Workday, Salesforce, Enabler, or some other. So Mulesoft, or in your API-led integration, is at the middle, which is connecting all services to these like web, mobile apps, devices, consumer services, and partners. And then once you move core part, the core which connects all the applications together, the services together is on the cloud. The other applications are forced to go on cloud and forced to switch to a service-based model. In this case, whatever you can see in the right-hand side, like on-prem block, is gradually moves to a hosted application block, because that your integrator, which is at the core, is actually facilitating this move without disrupting your business operations. So okay, so that's okay. So here in this whatever you can see on the screen is basically a depiction of typical life cycle of in a manufacturing and supply chain. So let me go a little deep into this example. So this is a snapshot of typical ecosystem of an integration in a manufacturing and supply chain industry. After detailed analysis, potential bottlenecks are identified, which are depicted in this diagram with hourglasses. Okay, you can see these hourglass icons, which are the potential bottlenecks. So there are so many bottlenecks are here. Okay, well, So although you can see some integrations which are customer facing, like online, which are API enabled, but you know, there are many which are still file to file based, and there are many which are batch to batch mode. Okay, so you know, you observe that not all applications and services are integrated real time, as you can see in this diagram. This organization as a whole is not able to take the full advantage of, you know, data which is in on the run or in the motion. So there are many such use cases which we, you know, think of, though we are, I mean, I'm not the domain expert, but there are some examples like demand. Like one very good example is demand. Demand management is constrained due to delay in loading forecast data. Pricing is another example which is linked with real-time stock position, demand, and shipment status. Okay. There are others like order management and stock management, which are mostly these days are driven by automotive systems. You scan the devices and you arrange it in such a way that your old stock should go out first, and all that stuff is all possible because you have that scanning devices linked to your ERP in real-time fashion. Okay, real-time APIs led, you know, integrations can change the complete perspective of operations and process of doing business. And these are the norms of smart manufacturing and fully integrated supply chain. There are some few examples like demand. Real-time API for demand will help keep right products in right quantity. So you need not to pile up your you know, products and let them expire. You can manage effective demand by integrating all those components, all those, let's say, shipments, stock management, order management, inquiry, and demand together. And you can have a very real-time perspective to take the decision. Stock, like keep only what is needed and thereby save space and reduce waste. In shipping, you might have heard about predictive shipping that Amazon does, which can only be possible or all related applications are sharing data real-time. Pricing, like on-spot discount, it's possible, you know, or it's linked to a constraint by the data which is coming from other modules. So precise forecast of customer demand by incorporating market trend, weather forecast, stock positions, and other important constraints are not possible with integrating all such solutions using real-time API. So now, as you can see, we have pushed a lot of information from all corners. Ensuring the data is delivered securely for all development guidelines and standards are one of the biggest challenges. So let me hand over to Scott, who will talk more about governance aspect of API development and its uses. Over to Scott. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks. So yeah, as Manish was mentioning, all of these bottlenecks of data here, we're going to start to replace with real-time APIs. So with all of this in this kind of industry, manufacturing and supply chain, having this real-time data means that we're exposing a lot of that data to outside worlds. So one of the things that we wanted to make sure was, as we built these APIs, that we have like proper governance. And that starts with these pieces here. So that the first one, which we talked about before, is the predefined patterns rulebook. So having those patterns that we knew how to code it, we knew how to test it, we knew where those vulnerabilities were. And then on the security side, we started off with, you know, making sure the networking security was in place, the firewalls and routers and that kind of stuff. And this particular customer actually used 2 dedicated load balancers, one for internal use and one for external use, as a way to protect those internal APIs from outside exposure. And then in addition to that, we have policies that were set up for, so the API-led architecture, we had certain policies for system APIs, we had other policies for process APIs, and then we broke our experience APIs into external and internal, and so we had different policies associated for those as well. So in order to get to not having a lot of duplicate services out there, we wanted to make sure that we documented our APIs, and we used endpoint exchange for that. So those documents there led towards the discoverability of the services instead of recreating services that essentially did the same thing that were services were already out there for. So having that piece there, people were able to go in and look at that documentation, see how it was implemented, and see what those security measures were in place. And then the next part is log aggregation and analytics. So MuleSoft has some capabilities towards log aggregation, but this customer, their subscription was not able to take advantage of those. So instead, they opted to use log aggregation with an outside tool. From there, we took the logs that MuleSoft generated in Cloud Hub, propagated them out to this log aggregation service, and from within there, we're able to build reports, and dashboards, and alerts to give the business and the support teams kind of visibility into what's happening on those APIs. In addition to those alerts and reports, we were able to build some of those capabilities into MuleSoft alerting as well. So the log aggregation was really talking about the business health of the applications, and the MuleSoft alerts were more towards the JVM health and also policy violations and those kinds of alerts. And then we also were able to leverage Anypoint Visualizer for governance as well. And so what Visualizer does is it gives you a real-time view of what that API-led architecture is. So you could see, hey, is this actually working the way that we designed it initially, as well as having some views into how the policies were pushed around the entire API-led design, and then and lastly, there's some troubleshooting capabilities there, so we can identify bottlenecks in the performance of those services. And lastly, was the CBO-based reusable framework, so this is really the having that common model for all of the different systems to interact with. And Manish is going to talk a little bit more about how we went ahead and built those that CBO-based framework.
Thank you. Okay, so service development. So here there are two approaches, top-down and bottom-up. In top-down approach, what happens? You adopt to a certain standard that are already in the market. Let's say standard for invoice object or for shipment object for Forex and all that stuff. And second approach is you analyze the existing data which is flowing through, and all similar objects, you can compile it together and create one and fuse everything together into one canonical model, incorporating all future related requirements, and look at the standard also. So your existing use cases or existing implementation aggregated with standard that are in the market, and then create one canonical format out of it. We prefer, though first one is ideally on paper looks very ideal because sticking to one standard, but in this case, you'll have to force your application system to adopt to a new standard, and it will be a very expensive procedure because they'll also need to a new standard. Second approach is rather little democratic in nature because you really need not to ask them to make changes. And then you consolidate their structures into a canonical structure, which is a canonical structure for your organization. Create it, document it, and then in this entire exercise, you need help from an SME that will help you define all that stuff because this is mostly a domain-driven activity. Once that is created, then you go ahead, create RAML documentations, if possible, create the services in the system API layer, create the process API and expose it on your marketplace in your catalog. So your once catalog is, you can go and advertise this API in the market and within your organization or outside an organization, wherever you want to use it. So this will contribute to the overall catalog that is created, and it will be your service endpoint. Okay. Let's say now once your service are developed, for example, invoice, you may have different invoice formats for different applications. And in different regions, because of certain aspects, taxation and other stuff, the format are also quite different. You define an invoice object which can incorporate all such requirements for an application, at the same time all such requirements for all the regions. So you have a canonical model of invoice which is serving all regions, all applications. Now you develop this as a service. You can see whatever seen in this green box is basically a service component which is not going to change. Now let's talk about our hybrid model where the same structure can support all three patterns. The first, let's say if somebody wants this data as a real-time API, you create an experience API and expose it through experience API for real-time API uses. Second pattern is, let's say, if it needs to be integrated with other application as an event or as an action for an event. You create an experience API and connect it through an event. Let's say your SAP event, a file event, or whatever event. There are so many event API or event connector available in MuleSoft. The third is, let's say I want to use it the way it was used before. It's a pure batch mode. And in that batch mode also, you don't have to touch the service component. Service component is going to be reused. Only a batch operations or a scheduler needs to be added on top of it as in the experience layer, and you are done with your batch operation. So with this small example, you can see that your service layer is going to be reused again and again, irrespective of how it's going to be used. Old way only for integrations, or if you want to make it real time. So here, if you have a very long-term plan to modify everything real time, but some applications are not supporting it, you have an option where you can go to a transition state where you can support old as new, and then gradually you can move to a new API-led integration. Okay. So we did that math, we did all calculations, and this graph, which you can see, is basically a depiction of degree of consolidation that we were able to achieve. Like you can see in shipment, there are 34 individual flows from source to various targets were running. They are all consolidated into one single object, that's shipment object. Or other examples, let's say sales order. There are sales order running from vendor applications, customer application, online, partners, on phone, ARPs, all are consolidated together into one single object, and then the sales order object is created and exposed, irrespective of how it's going to be used. Okay, so this diagram it's just a consolidation of reusability can be achieved with this service-based approach. If we compile everything together, since what we started discussing about the journey, everything into one, it looks like this. So you have all three layers defined clearly: experience layer, process layer, system layer, and you can see your service endpoint will be at process layer level, and then you have an enablement section, which is an experience layer, and all your users, irrespective of how they are going to use it, old way, new way, they can use your API-led architecture. There are some utility APIs which are helping and which are common for all API implementation. So in this entire case, once your service catalog is ready, your services are up and running, you have to focus only on the enablement part. Okay. Now, when we have done all that stuff, the most important part is to realize the benefit. Without calculating the benefit, it's very difficult to convince the management and to business and to yourself that we are going in the right direction. So I'll hand over to Scott, who will talk about how to calculate the KPI, how to measure the benefit of APIification. And we took, MuleSoft white paper that actually advocates about how to calculate it. So let's over to Scott, who will talk more about KPI.
Thanks. So this KPI dashboard that we built, we were able to leverage MuleSoft platform APIs and Power BI to build this dashboard. What the big reason why I wanted to do this was we wanted to be able to go back and show the business kind of what the state of things were, how many APIs were being built, how many apps were deployed, what the subscription utilization remaining was for their platform, as well as kind of a real-time look into their policies and the reusability of the services. So given they had this dashboard that they could show back to the executives, they would be able to show the progress throughout the 18 months of delivering these applications. And then leveraging some of this data, we're able to do take, as Manish mentioned, take the white paper, how to articulate the value of integration, and come back with this particular calculation. So looking at how the entire transformation was going to go, we noticed that there's we broke it into 12 different projects, and then each project had about 75 APIs that needed to be built. Looking at the KPI dashboard and seeing kind of the reusability aspects, we expected to have roughly about a 60% reuse of APIs. So with each project, 45 of those APIs would not need to be built because they were built in a prior project. So that was kind of the savings we had there. And then with some other data, we were able to determine that it was about 120 hours to build one API, and the flattened rate per hour was $60, and that included both on-site and remote resources. So with that savings of those 45 APIs, that led to about $324,000 worth of savings per project, and then that number spread across the 12 projects across the 18 months led to roughly about a $4 million in savings. Even though that we saved that much, there were some other benefits that we were able to get as well. So looking at these business outcomes, we're able to take these batch-based integrations and build real-time APIs in the strategic areas on those, and that led to us having the capability of automating processes. And so as we were able to automate some of those processes, that led to an improved operational efficiency at the organization, as well as having that flexibility of adapting to changes, because we built these reusable APIs that were more kind of more agile and more responsive to the needs of the customer versus being straight point-to-point integrations. This led to having 60% faster integrations and streamlining our process, and led to that operational efficiency. And that's kind of what we've seen today. But going forward, having these CBOs in place gives us that loosely coupled, that future-proof aspect. So as we can swap systems in and out without impacting the organization as a whole. So building these CBO-based service endpoints allow us to more quickly respond to those needs of the customer by being able to swap systems in and out. And so from there, we can reduce the dependency on some of these solutions, and we have that adaptive design, which will allow us to just have a more efficient rollout of these services. But there were a couple of things that we learned through this process, and Manish will kind of share those thoughts on success. Manish.
Thank you. Scene is basically for migration of existing one. Imagine the kind of saving you have for all future requirements. Your development life cycle will be reduced from 3 to 4 weeks. I mean, from 4 weeks to just 1.5 weeks. So that way also you're going to save a lot in future. But okay, so this is our Diwali crackers. Some takeaway or some experience sharing. So I mean, this is our assumption, and this is our learning. Before convincing others, you'll have to convince yourself, because your idea will be tested, will be challenged by all application team. People, organizations have inertia for change. I mean, they don't want to change because they feel like what is going on is the best. And it's a human nature. So you have to, you will be challenged at every corner. You'll have to be very confident on your story and its value proposition. Set the guideline, as we said in guiding principle, and stick to it. Educate and keep educating. Yes, you have to keep educating others because there's a lot of confusion among users or among even applications team. We are focusing more on, API as enabler for process automation. So you may have to deal with people who are not very much well with API or real-time integration pattern or like that. Strong leadership is the most important factor, because this change is not just a software development or application development, or it's not a typical enterprise integration where you connect one dots with another dot. This is a transformation, and this transformation is at organization level. The complete culture of the organization is changing. So in this case, You need a very strong leadership behind you to support you in this entire journey. Again, do not force feed, that I mentioned before as well. If you force feed in certain scenarios or certain use cases are not meant for real-time APIs. For example, if you have a very high volume, you're reconciling every end of the day rather than using it as for real-time processes, you need not to have an API. If you try to create an API, there will be a lot of frustrations, and then your ideas will be challenged. So don't force feed. It will backfire. And then at last, the KPI dashboard, what Scott has covered, calculate the benefit and share that benefit with the management, because that's low-lying flow. You can pick this up, show your benefits, and this will help you in this long journey. Okay, thank you. Thanks, for spending time with us. Let me take some questions that we can see.
Yeah, Manish, so good amount of questions that we have received. And thanks, team, for sending those here. So I will just take one by one, and then we will see, as per the time permit, we will cover most of them, and then we can approach the audience if required. So the first question, here we go. Does MuleSoft support the drive of API democratization, where teams, business, or IT can contribute to citizen development on API democratization?
Yeah, I can take that one. So yes, so MuleSoft's API-led architecture starts out with like that we were talking about, the system APIs, and the system APIs are really meant to be developed by the teams that are closer to those systems. But as you start to kind of grow with using MuleSoft, the idea is to take some of those, the middle layer, the orchestration process APIs. You want to take those and you want to share those with the other teams, because then they can build those implementations on their own and see the value of leveraging those system APIs. And so what that kind of does, it does a couple of things. The first thing it does is it gives the power to the line of business IT teams to adapt and make those changes faster. And then secondly, what it does is it helps promote the use of those APIs throughout your organization. So that's going to drive kind of that success, and it's going to give you that momentum to get more budget or ask for more capabilities or expand your API usage across the enterprise.
Effort. And if you look at the marketplace or exchange, MuleSoft Exchange, there is an option where you can contribute or you can share your ideas, you can rate an API, and based on that, API adoption or modification or enhancement can be done. So it is more like democratization is very much part of the core philosophy of API. Okay, let's take another question. I hope we answered the question.
How can predefined services reduce the amount of time required to build integration?
Yep, I'll take this question. So I think we covered that portion. So if you look at that, let me go back to this slide. Okay, so you can see this service, what we did, like we created one service like shipment or invoice or Forex rate or say sales order or whatever. I mean, you identify in your organization, you develop it, publish the YAML documentation, and even possible if you implement it with the system APIs, you need not to redevelop this all over again, because we are exposing a canonical model which is supporting all possible permutation combinations of data. In this case, you only focus on how it can be used. And you can see if you need it real time, you create an experience API or a simple proxy and you expose it. If you want it to be integrated with your event generator or event system, you can do that. And at the same time, if you want to use it traditional way, like pure batch mode, you can do that using with an experience API. You need not to touch this service layer at all. So in future, if you have to develop another, let's say invoice, I'll take my example, invoice for, let's say, in Mexico or in Brazil or some other area or Latin America, You need not to really develop a new integration from source to target. You have a format already available. You just plug in your system if you have a new system, and then you plug in your new API consumer using Experience API. And if our consumers are ready to accept the format, the canonical which you are exposing, then you don't need that Experience API. You need simple proxy for that particular consumer. So you can save a lot of time developing, discussing, and finalizing that data format if you have a service model in place. Yeah. I hope I answered this question. Can we go to the next?
The question that I have is, according to you, how important is real-time integration in digital transformation? Should I repeat?
Yeah, you start. You can. We started with this point.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yes, Scott.
Yep. So yeah, it's very important, right? Because not having that information where you need it, when you need it, so like especially in the COVID era, having a batch job that runs once a week that moves inventory, dispositions from your warehousing system to your e-commerce system, that's not going to work, because the customer who's going to be buying that material wants to know where that inventory is when they place the order, and then so not having that real-time view into those different pieces of information is going to lead to customer frustration, and it's going to lead to problems with making decisions, as Manish talked about earlier, about planning, right? So not knowing that somebody's going to buy this predictive, there's going to be these estimates of getting information into getting materials into the warehouses. Not having that information on a real-time basis, especially as it changes, leads to poor planning, and then that leads to out-of-stock issues or issues with delivering the materials to the customer. So it is very important.
Next one is, does the log aggregation, analytics, and alerting have an ability towards self-tracing and self-healing AI-enabled features where problems can be detected or preempt?
Very good question. I think we are mixing AI with log analytics here, and that's a very good, let's say, use case. Though by default, correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, but by default, this AI feature is not running on top of log analytics. We need to configure this. And we can study the pattern, the log aggregator. If you really talk about Splunk or some other log, it's all dependent on how we are aggregating and doing the trend analysis. And based on that trend analysis, if you want to, add or attach certain actions, that's how our AI works. Reading that trend, based on that trend, it actually, or alert, it's taking some decision, going back into your application and checking whether it's running or not. It's require restart, or then it's restart. But I think some sort of AI part is already inbuilt in MuleSoft. So you really need not to worry about something like fault tolerance in application. It's not memory consumption. It automatically does this corrective actions by restarting it. But if you, on top of it, if you want to control other applications also through AI, log aggregator will give you the complete dump of what is going on with trend analysis, with correlation analysis, or traceability. But on top of that, if you want to include any AI steps, you can do that. And I think that is possible. Yeah, over to Scott.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly, Manish. So a couple of things on the MuleSoft side. Number one, as Manish mentioned, there is some self-healing that happens already. So just without any other interaction, there's a ping that Cloud Hub makes against the APIs every 30 seconds to see if the API is functional and running. If it's not running, then it will actually do a restart of those services. In addition, you could deploy this to multiple workers, and each workers are in different availability zones. So if there's a data center failure, then there's high availability, and those APIs are then being leveraged in the second availability zones. And then lastly, Mulesoft does have the ability to auto scale. So if you have an API and that API is running 2 workers and it starts to see a lot of load and response time starts to kind of tick up, with the enterprise license agreement, you can actually get an auto scale where it will actually scale up to multiple workers or more workers, or even vertically scale up to a bigger container. So all those places are already out there as part of MuleSoft is by default.
I think one more additional recent release, there's something called Uberization of memory management. That also is very interesting stuff. You need not to worry about too much about memory management, or don't have to do at design time. System MuleSoft itself will allocate memory at runtime, whatever, in an amount which is required for that operations to run. I think I'll recommend you go to this documentation, which is available online, Uberization concept of memory management in MuleSoft, which is very recent. I think last month or last month it was.
Yeah, right. And that I think kind of ties to that Uber pool thread pooling changes that were made with MuleSoft 4.3.
Sure. So Manish, Scott, before I go to the next technical question, I do have one question from my side, Scott, especially this is for you. How do you see APIification work that is happening in current scenarios after the pandemic is kind of getting over? And how do you feel customers are reacting to it? Because I know for sure you have always, you are always engaged back to back. One and the another thing, your availability is always a challenge. I know for sure.
Yeah,
so how
definitely.
do you find, the interest level from customers that we are getting? How are they inclined? How are they, reacting to this situation? And then the upcoming situation, which is going to get open very soon. So your thought around that, Scott, will help.
Sure. So yeah, you're right. So I've been at MuleSoft for about 2 years now, and I've had 9 different customers, and so it is pretty much back to back. Prior to the COVID pandemic, I think there was a lot of interest in digitalization, right? So they see companies like Amazon and other companies that have that strong API architectures, and they realize that if I don't adapt, much like these other companies are, I'm going to be left in waiting and then maybe even fail. So there's a lot of drive to actually building these APIs, but since the pandemic started, that drive is like really it's have like a fever to it, because they now with all these changes, they realize that they can adapt as the world changes. They can't make those changes in that real-time basis. Their IT departments are not responsive towards the changing landscapes. And so since the pandemic has hit, there's been a lot more push towards getting those in there, and not only just from the API side, but also empowering the IT departments to actually get their application code out there, and to reduce the design time. Like when we were at the customer that we're talking about, they had like a 9-week, anytime somebody has an idea, it's like 9 weeks before anything can happen to it. Well, with MuleSoft, we were able to get that down to a couple of weeks. So having that responsive capability from the IT side is going to definitely help the customer pivot as these changes happen. Now, when we start talking about the post-pandemic era, so I really think that my hope is that we're still going to be able to leverage these lessons that we've learned during the pandemic era. And given it may not be as imperative to get these things done, I think much like we're seeing with the remote learning or learning as people are working more remotely, work still happens, jobs still get done. And so a lot of companies are even adopting more full remote strategies. So I'm going to tie those two together and say that I think a lot of the customers who are going through that digital transformation will still kind of work with that same fervor.
So Scott, and I do have few more technical questions which is piled up, but in the interest of time, I will take one question which is very interesting. I think this will also be a good question. So here it goes. Why MuleSoft? What is the advantage of using MuleSoft over other tools?
So I think Yeah, I'll start with it, and Manish can kind of finish it up. So Manish did talk about earlier about having, so MuleSoft is kind of interestingly placed in that we are a strong leader in API development, as well as part of that Gartner Magic Quadrant on ESB. So instead of having to buy two solutions for everything you do and then having to manage information going from your API gateways to your ESPs, MuleSoft has all that stuff covered in one kind of fell swoop. In addition to that, a lot of the other competition that's out there, they're really kind of focused on either getting just the API parts to work or just the ESB parts to work, and they're not working cohesively together. And with that, not having two kind of guidelines to follow for everything makes it a lot more difficult. And with MuleSoft, a couple of things that we add on top of this is we have this API-led architecture, and the API-led architecture is to Manish's point, not just a, hey, this is how you implement our software. It's a methodology that allows you to be successful with your digital transformations. And we've seen it success across thousands of customers with MuleSoft. And not only is MuleSoft going to say, okay, you bought our software, here you go, good luck. We have great partners like LTI and other partners and professional services and a myriad of other teams that will help you through these integrations. And it's like I said, we've done it at thousands of customers at this point. So we have playbooks, and we have different guidelines kind of and success factors to follow to help every customer be successful.
I think you have covered pretty much every aspects, though I told not to take name of other tools, but worked in similar kind of tools in the past as well. I mean, since last 7-8 years, been working on APIfication. API-led ESB is something which is with MuleSoft. MuleSoft is designed for API. Its ESB is also designed for API. And in that sense, it's way different than other tools. So I think you have already mentioned, like, you need not to have multiple solutions. You want something for API gateway, something for API manager, something for ESB on-prem, something for ESB on cloud. And you need not to have all those different tools. You also add management overhead and all that stuff. You need one package solution which are linked with each other, integrated with each other. And building a core, it's a complete solution in itself. So from that aspect, yes, MuleSoft is the best tool in the market. I'll not go by all these research, but as a developer, and you have done the similar development in other tools also, MuleSoft is going forward. Thank you.
Fantastic, Manish. So, Scott, Manish, I think we have 2 more minutes, so I will attend one more question, which is very interesting again. In the regards to the democratization aspect, do you still find teams acting at each layer, where maybe a more experienced team accounts in the process layer to control the canonical model, whereas experienced system may be one-offs, batch, bounded context times for a variety of teams to implement in these layers? This is the last question.
So Manish, you want to start with that one?
See, that's a very good question. Very good question. Yes, that's absolutely right. That at the process layer level where we are exposing, this is our service endpoint, a technical service endpoint, not user service endpoint. User service endpoint is still an experience layer. So technical service endpoint is to be controlled by somebody. It's part of API governance, ensuring that all standards are followed, and it's developed with proper guideline and everything. So in the democratic process, you are actually, when you are launching this API, you have different way of packaging it together. If we really talk about API as a product, and that's one also way of using an API. So if you are packaging it together, definitely this packaging is done by somebody who has knowledge of business, and they know the market trend and how the services can be packaged. IT role is, is just to support it. There could be, if an automation, if we are using it as a tool for process automation, in that case, in whatever way it's to be integrated, we can integrate it. And there, the role of one technology is. I think long back, you referred, there's one white paper on this, like who can control what layer was there. If you Google it, you can find it. I think it's like 3-4 years back, I've written this paper and it's in public domain. But yeah, Scott, you can share your views on this.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, exactly. I agree with everything you said there. Just a couple other things to add on to it is just because we have that service catalog that is at the process layer, that really kind of controls orders, for instance. And so it's the endpoint for orders that get created. But if you have process automations that do stuff with orders and customers together, there's no, you could build more process APIs that call other process APIs, and that's totally acceptable. As Manish was talking about with automation, there are tools in Mulesoft right now that allow you to build these automation APIs without actually having to write any code. So that's something to think about as well as you're going through this. If you have people in your business organization that are very familiar with how to build how to get data from these other places, that combined with having that discoverability and exchange allows them to say, okay, I need to pull contact information from our CRM tool and then some product information from our PIM tool, and together push that out to an email campaign tool or something like that. If that's kind of what they need to build, and those underlying services are already constructed, then they could easily build that through it's like a flow automation tool, I think is what it's called in MuleSoft. So they can build that right inside the website and have that capabilities there. Now, that being said, there's going to need to be some governance on that as well, just because you're building that out. Yep, sorry, I went long.
Yeah. So Scott, we are on time. Actually, we are just ahead of 2 minutes now. So I think thank you so very much for your time and insightful information that you people have shared. Thank you very much, Manish, Scott, for your valuable time. And thanks all the participants. I hope you might have got some insights around that. And definitely we are going to get in touch with the team for their more queries, more doubts that we have. And then we can take the discussion forward as per their interest. Thank you very much. Have a nice time ahead. Stay safe and stay healthy. Good night. Have a nice day ahead. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you. Thanks, Scott.